Hello and welcome back. This is MC1 Gamer, bringing you a response video to Vince Ventrello's ongoing topic of the week run, which I think is great. By the way, I love the idea that it gets the community involved. It allows for various interaction, keeps us all occupied and a little bit distracted while we're waiting for a newer version of Warhammer to come out. And it's something to listen to while we're painting and converting and doing overall hobby stuff. So I really like the topic this week. I missed last week's. I was in the first week, the first one, but it's been a pretty busy week this past week. And I just saw this one. I'm going to have a really crazy week coming ahead too. So I just wanted to weigh in with a video as soon as possible on this week's. This week's involves soft scores. Now, the initial question, and there's a series of questions. I'm going to go through them. And this one is about what do you think of soft scores and how should they count towards for the overall score in a tournament. Now, what we're talking about specifically, in case anybody doesn't know what soft scores is we're talking about tournament play. So this is organized competitive play. So we're not talking about casual games. We're not talking about pickup games. We're talking specifically about the competitive circuit. And when they talk about soft scores, they're talking about things like sportsmanship and paint specifically. So when you are in most tournaments, when you're being scored for how well you do, it's not just the point structure based on the scenarios and the games that you play with other competitors, with other players. It's also how good does your army look? How good of a job did you do painting it, if you did it? And we'll get into that shortly. Just how cohesive is the army in terms of its scheme? Is there a theme? Various different types of things, and then of course sportsmanship, which is how much of an asshole are you, or how cool of a guy are you? I guess it's kind of tough with that one, and I have a bunch of opinions on that one because you certainly want to play against and play with people that have a good attitude and are enjoyable to play. You want to also hopefully be the kind of person that others will look at and say, hey, I want to get a game with this person. I think it would be cool. I think it'd be a lot of fun. You don't want to play with somebody who's a sore loser, who's too loud and obnoxious, who cheats. Certainly, there's a lot of different things that apply to that. So if you're not familiar with it, that's what happens is that there's an overall score that is applied, and then the winner is assessed based on the complete score across all different things. And the first thing is, what do I think soft scores should be? I think, of course, in a competitive situation, the vast majority of points, if I dare say 90%, should be the competition score, the actual score from what you achieved on the board with your army. And I think that when it comes to soft scores, my opinion is they should be a part of the scoring system because I think they're part of the hobby. And I think that some people lose sight of that when it comes to the uber competitiveness that some people get involved with when it comes to these games. I mean, I've said it before. I'm not the only person who said it. I'm certainly not the first person who said it. Warhammer wasn't initially created to be a competitive game. It was created to be a beer and pretzels game, a kind of game that you just laugh at when ludicrous stuff happens. And people take it very, very seriously in the competitive scene. Way, way more seriously than I think I could. I mean, I've gotten into the competitive scene, and I've seen myself kind of get sucked into that. You want to do good. Who wouldn't? Who doesn't want to win? But I want to have fun more. And there are times where I've kind of just dialed it back a little bit and taken a step away. Certainly when I first was involved in the hobby years ago, and when I've gotten back into the hobby, I've decided that I want to be competitive. I certainly want to be competent, and I want to be able to place and do well in a competitive situation. But I don't want that to be the rule by which how I play is based on how I do, and the accomplishments that I have and the enjoyment that I have revolves mostly about how I perform in a tournament. Because if that's the case, I'm going to be sorely disappointed. I'm going to get frustrated a lot more, and I don't want to do that. And I see, that in other players, to less, not to any great degree, but certainly I see frustrations in a competitive situation where you don't achieve what you believe you should or what you legitimately should, and that can take. I think it can take away from a lot of the fun of the hobby. I think we spend far too much time painting and playing. This is not a game that you play in 20 minutes or half an hour. It's a game that you play, and it occupies a lot of time, and certainly it's not cheap. And I think that you want to maximize the amount of fun that you have. And for me, that's not imposing that on anyone else. For me, I think it's a balance between competitiveness and the casual play. So, but my feeling is if you're going to get into the tournament play, I think the most of it should be the score of how you did in the scenarios and in the actual games. And then the rest should be an equalizer. The rest should be, how do we differentiate between the people who are on par? Because again, if it's a tournament, it's a competition. I think that it would be nice to break out painting, things like that, where converting is involved, and that stuff could be its own prize level or its own trophy or its own independent scoring. But I think if not all tournaments have the money for that, they have limited prize support just based on the financials of running a tournament. It's not all tournaments are massive. Some of the most successful tournaments we see have upwards of 80, 90, 100 attendees. That's supposed to be some of the bigger tournaments that we see in the regional tournaments in the U.S. that I know of. We're not talking about thousands of people. We're talking about a small group of people, and even those big ones. Some of the local ones that I see are if they get 30 or 40 people, that's a pretty good showing. I've seen a few that are 50, and that's pretty good. And you can get tiers. You can have breakout things where you just have an overall an independent painting and converting score with trophy and prize support, which is nice. But other than that, if you're going to have just one tier and have these things apply, I think they should be more of equalizers and the kind of things that separate you from the pack. Because you're going to get a lot of people who are going to be relatively close in terms of their generalship score and how they did in the actual competitive side. So that's how I feel about that. As far as sportsmanship, I think it's really hard for me to make a real opinion about sportsmanship, because I have so many different opinions about how it should apply and how you really regulate it. Because sometimes it's about who you like based on who you know. If you don't know somebody, they may be focused on the game, and maybe they're not all maybe they're bringing they're not, as Naren said, buying sportsmanship points by bringing alcohol, or maybe they didn't give away gifts. Or maybe they're just not, they don't have the personality that they're they're a lot of fun and cheery and they're funny and snarky. But they're focused on the game, they're focused on the competition, and that can detract because of personality. I mean, personality shouldn't detract from a sportsmanship score. If you're a good player, if you're a fair player, and if that should be what it's gauged on. And I think a lot of times the sportsmanship score can be who to have more fun with. And instead of who's doing the right things in a competitive game to make it enjoyable in a competitive scenario. I mean, if it's a casual game, there's the easy way to mark who's got the highest sportsmanship score is who gets invited to play more. Who gets the answer yes when they say, hey, you want to get a game in. Those are the things that are scores for casual. For competitive, it's hard because those kind of things can very much be skewed based on who you know, how popular you are, what kind of personality you have, and I think I think it should be a very small element to the game, mostly based on the detractors of the game. Instead of being the kind of a positive thing that you get for what you should be doing anyway, which is playing right, playing well, playing fair, being a good sport. It should be the kind of thing where I think mostly are penalized if you're not doing that, for the people who are being asshats and are taking away the fun of the game. I think that's the way I would like to see it scored, as a negative applier as opposed to a positive. I think if we all assume that we're all on the same playing field in the competitive scene, because if I'm cheerier and funnier than the guy at the next table, but the guy 2 tables over is having a laugh riot and they're having a great time whether he wins or not, it really, we should be just, again, beer and pretzels. We're putting, as I said in a previous video, you're trying to jam a square peg in a round hole here with a game that was not meant for a competitive environment and putting it into a competitive environment. So okay, so that's the first question. The next question is, what should their weight be, and what about things like the Masters? Okay, so I mentioned about the weight and my thoughts on that. But about things like the Masters, I think that when it comes to things like the Masters, I think that applies to some of the other questions that were posed by Vince. The Masters is supposed to be a level where the best shines through. The best of the best represents the hobby. And while a lot of people are really focused on how well they do on the table, part of the hobby is painting. Part of the hobby is converting. It used to be a massive part of the hobby when Warhammer was the community was mostly run by GW. They sponsored things. They sponsored events at stores. They still do, but there's almost no stores. The local game stores taken over that, and the independent tournaments that sometimes have organized, and certainly when it comes to the Masters, it's more of a national and international organization that has tried to regulate that, which is great. I think it's good for the hobby. I think that it really should be more about the technical stuff, the competitive aspect, how well you did in your games, and the other technical part, which is painting and converting. And if you're not adept at it, then you shouldn't do as well. And that comes down to the next part, which is, what I mean is that sportsmanship shouldn't be as much of an indicator of whether you go to the Masters, unless you're really, just again a complete asshole. And again, that should take away from whether you should be part of, there should be some character element in representing your country or your region at the Masters. But ultimately, if you're looking at a competitive environment, a lot of the best competitors in various different things like, sports, for example. I know Warhammer isn't a sport, but, try standing up for 12, 15 hours straight over the course of 2 or 3 days while you're, look, there's a level of endurance. If poker is a sport, if poker is a sport, if professional video gaming is a sport, Warhammer can be considered a sport as well. In any case, without debating that any further, I think that if you're going to represent the point that I was trying to make is that there are plenty of people in professional sports that are complete dicks. And they perform very well, and people don't care because they succeed. Sometimes the people who you love to hate tend to be very popular too. So I don't think that necessarily should be an applier when it comes to the Masters. I think that it should have, if it has some weight, it shouldn't have a whole lot of weight. It should have more weight if you're a complete asshole. All right, but as far as the idea of allowing the buying of paint or sportsmanship, let's talk about paint first. And I'm going to start this with a story. One of the first tournaments that I had with the End Times, and I had been in a couple small tournaments, really minor things, but I had built up Nagash and converted him, basically hacked him up. I was one of the first people that did it. There was one other person I think that did it before me that did that I know of that was widely shown, and I had long had plans to do it as soon as the model first came out. And I was very excited about doing it, and I saw a great one where somebody with him sitting on a throne, what I call Nagash on the toilet. But it was a great conversion. But he just looks like he's on a toilet reading a magazine. He's reading his book. And anyway, so I did a huge conversion, and I got a lot of laughs about, are you crazy for converting up this $100 model and hacking it up? And I put a lot of time into it. It took me forever, and I still haven't finished painting it. But I brought it to a tournament with a dirty list. And I mean, a very dirty list. It was just a very hardcore, very tough list with just one of the tougher lists that I had analyzed, or I had even, I don't know if it was the same that I'd seen other people build, but I think other people have had variations on it. And I rolled through most of the people that I played, and I got pretty lucky that I didn't face a lot of cannons. So the cannons that I did face with the Skaven kind of blew up, so they weren't a serious threat. And I mitigated it with a screen of meat shields with Cryptars. And I did extremely well in general points. My general score was the top. I should have won in terms of general score, but I didn't have a fully painted army. And even though my army was I think it was probably 99% converted, it wasn't all painted. There were some things that were just base coated, just primed, and there were some things that were still I didn't even do anything on the bases yet. They were bare. There wasn't even any no flocking, no gravel, nothing. And I have a very high model count army. I have a case that is probably God knows, it's probably about 3 feet high, stacked up, and I have every option possible that I could summon from the gash, or every reasonably possible. And it's a lot to paint, and it takes time, and I'm not a very fast painter, but I didn't get the full scores for painting, and as a result, I didn't win the overall score. I had the higher generalship, but I didn't win the overall score. And the person who did was our buddy Ant from the Sustainable Center. He beat me out by just a couple of points, and the reason why is he had a very nicely painted Dwarven army, and his generalship was below mine, but because he had this sweet looking Dwarven army, he beat me out. And that's why we had a grudge match video, which I in turn won. But again, that's neither here nor there. The point is that his army wasn't painted by him. He purchased it, and I don't really care. And I made that comment at the time. I don't think it matters. I think it's good for the hobby that he had a painted army, that his painted army was a good-looking army. And if somebody walked by and looked at this tournament and saw these armies on the table, I don't care how cool you may think that my Nagash was, or all those conversions I had. Half my army wasn't very impressive because it was not even nearly complete, and his was fully complete. And if you took a gander from a few feet away, it looked magnificent. And even if you had the wherewithal to come up and take a closer look, it still was a good-looking army. He bought that army. He didn't paint it. And I think that that's perfectly valid. Should there be a cap? Okay, I never really thought about that until some people had brought that up with the argument of, should people be able to get good paint scores if they didn't paint it themselves? Okay, maybe there should be a cap. Fine. But, how do you prove it? Whether you feel, and I did do a video on this once before, probably about the better part of maybe 9 months or a year ago. How do you prove it? You ask, okay, hey, did you paint that? The judges go around, did you paint that? Maybe they ask some qualifying questions. How well, what did you do? What did you do to make those shades? How did you make this blending? What techniques did you use? And if the person weighs in with those techniques, then you can reasonably assume that they actually did the work themselves. But what if they're pretty savvy? What if they know some basics of painting? What if they just are well schooled and watched a lot of videos and know some of the techniques, but they didn't actually do it? You can't prove it. And if you can't prove it, then those questions really are kind of a waste. I don't think people with more money are going to do better because if they have the ability to buy great, just magnificently painted armies versus the people who spend an extremely long period of time converting and painting the way they want it to be. I often joke that my son will probably be graduating from school when I finish my vampire counts, now my Undead Legions army, because it's the model count is ginormous. I mean, it's many hundreds of models, and I have the insanity of converting everything from scratch and just the way I want it. And I'm hoping that it'll still be valid in 9th edition. I'll be proxying or adjusting or whatever, and I'm in a holding pattern waiting till we get some confirmation about stuff so I don't waste any further time on things that might not be applicable. I'm feeling better about where we're going with that, but I've been holding off. But that's stuff I want to do it at my speed and complete it in my good time. And if I'm going to get a lesser score as a result, I should, because it's not completed. It's not fully painted. It's not as impressive. Will it be one day? Maybe. Maybe I'm just not that talented. But if somebody else has an army that is magnificently painted, converted or otherwise, whether it's standard models or not, I think that they deserve that score. And I think that if there's a cap, sure, that's fine. But people can lie. And unless you're going around the circuit, unless you can recognize somebody else's work, or if you're common in the competitive circuit where people can possibly tell whether or not it was your army, you really can't police that very well, and people will get away with it. So it's the kind of thing where maybe you catch some people, maybe you don't. And if there's serious ramifications like banning, there's going to be situations where some people are going to get through, some people aren't. I just don't know if you can police it appropriately. So I'm really not concerned about it because I just think that we're taking these tournaments too seriously. I think that it's a nice, fun thing, a competitive thing, but I think it should be dialed back a little bit. Sure, the person at the next table has a nice a much nicer army than I have because he or she spent a fortune to get it painted. Wonderful. It looks great. It's good for the hobby. And if I'm going to lose by a thin margin because that person has a more impressive army and I don't, and I haven't either had the time or the talent or the wherewithal to go and spend the time to go finish the army that I brought onto the table, then I don't think I deserve it, regardless of whether I had blood, sweat, and tears put into my army. It's not finished. It's not completed. It's not as impressive. I do think that there should be some consideration for if you did it yourself, especially if there's a lot of conversions involved. I think it promotes and supports the hobby. I think it encourages people to do more and to keep raising that bar, which only can benefit the hobby, which only can improve the hobby, which only can make it more impressive for people who see the hobby from the outside and say, wow, I want to be part of that, or for people who are involved in it and say, I want to raise my game. If you don't have the desire or the talent, and you can find someone else that can, it still supports the hobby. It supports the overall community. You're helping fund people with their talent to help keep the hobby growing, to keep the awareness, to keep it impressive. So I don't really care about that. You might, if you're really uber competitive and those 1 or 2 or 10 points really count and they matter to you, and you go to sleep well at night thinking, hey, I got that nice little trophy, or I got that credit at the last tournament that I won, or I placed that because I think it matters that that it was me and that person stole $15 or $20 from me, or a cute trophy, or their trophy's 2 or 3 inches taller. I think you're losing sight of what this game is about, and I think that the tournaments have gotten maybe get a little too serious. I don't think everybody is that way. I think that there are just some people who are that way, and that's what fosters the opposing argument to my opinion, and that's valid. Look, if that's how you feel, fine. I don't agree with it, but it doesn't diminish that standpoint. You certainly have a valid point if that's how you feel. I just don't agree, at least not fully. And I'm saying that as a person who enjoys the competitive side. So don't think that I'm a Care Bear, that I'm just a casual player. I'm not. I'm a player who looks at all spectrums of the hobby and of the game. Now, next point: should all tournaments require painted armies? And I already answered the question about how I feel about the capping. But should all tournaments have require that you have painted armies? Right now most of the tournaments I see don't, and that mean that they do that to try and keep it as inclusive as possible, to limit the barrier of entry for people who want to be part of it. Now, that doesn't mean that you should be encouraging people to have all gray armies. You can have something like as basic as, it needs to at least be 3 shades. You need to have at least a primer, a base shade, and some kind of coloring on your base, the base that the model sits on. Something along those lines. Some measure of color, and that's easy to do. You don't have to have each model be perfectly finished. You could have a primer, a base coat, and a shade at the very minimum across your entire army. It's not. Even an army as big as mine. If I'm bringing in 2 or 3 blocks of units onto the table that are gray or metal, and that's what you see, it takes away from the feel of the game when you're against somebody else. And I'm a violator of that. I am, but the tournaments that I've been to have been relaxed because they don't want to limit the people that can join, but they encourage that with the paint scores. And I've actually been a big supporter of that. I've lobbied for it heavily, especially at one of the local game stores that I attend, the only game in town in Somerville, New Jersey. Plug. I've said to them, I said, please have a prize support. Please set something aside for paint, for just individual paint scores, however you apply it towards the overall score. Give that element, put that element into the prize support, because it encourages the hobby. And what else does it do? It encourages people to buy more stuff at your store, because if they're encouraged to paint, they're going to buy the primer, they're going to buy the paints, they're going to get brushes, they're going to buy glue, they're going to get green stuff. They may be getting it online at discount prices that they find better than the local store, but they also are going to be more likely to purchase things at the store. They'll buy more kits for converting and for bits. It just supports the hobby. I think there should be something in there. I'm highly supportive of it, and I think that's something that should be part of the game, of the hobby, in the tournament scene. But I think that more often than not, I think it should be a requirement of some basic level of paint. It doesn't have to be all completely finished. Encourage the positive. Provide benefits for people who are supporting that element of the hobby on the tournament level. So any TOs that are watching, I'm sure you already know this, but that's what I feel. Sportsmanship. How should it be rated? I don't really care about the idea of buying sportsmanship. You want to give me a drink? You want to throw me a tchotchke? That's great. It's nice. I think it's fun. I think it's funny, hysterical. I wouldn't want to play against somebody who had a Barbie army. I wouldn't want to play against. I think I'd be in the right frame of mind. I think it would be hysterical to play against that Brony army from Naren Zaid. But those kind of gimmick things, I think that I'd rather not see them be pervasive throughout tournament play. But I'm going off on a completely different thing. But I think it's hysterical that they're there, and I find it funny. I think it's great to have those types of that type of originality and creativity. I think that when you see them, one or two at an event, I think it's fun and it's funny. So, but I don't think that those things should be the kind of things that, just because you give something away or you give somebody a drink, buy somebody a drink or give them a shot or whatever, that it should promote better sportsmanship scores. I think that we should encourage that kind of stuff because that's just, it's a funner game. It's a more fun community. It's a better experience if everybody's just trying to raise the level of enjoyment and being friendly and whatnot. I don't necessarily think it's buying sportsmanship. If somebody goes in with the goal of doing that, which I think could be a funny gimmick too, if you're going to do that, wear it on your sleeve, man. Put up a sign. Take a shot. Give me an extra point for sportsmanship. Free bin of minis as long as you give me an extra point of sportsmanship for each player that I go up against. I wouldn't do it, but I'd bring drinks, of course. Why not? But I don't think it matters. I think that when it comes down to it, I think that most players are going to score the way based on how much fun they had. Unfortunately, again, as I said before, it's going to be the kind of thing where it's going to get skewed based on your, who you know, how well you know them, how much you like them, versus maybe how well they're playing the game and how fair they are. So there's, somebody who's focused and concentrated on the game may not be as much fun. But how should it be scored? As I said before, it should be more of a detractor than a positive. Take away points from people who did bad things. Don't necessarily take away points from people just because they don't have as much of a fun personality as the guys, at the next table. So that's how I feel about it. I really think that overall, soft scores are good for tipping the scales and encouraging people in positive ways at tournaments and in differentiating them from others when the generalship is fairly close. I think that it's the kind of thing where it shouldn't have so much weight that it takes away from if it's going to be a competition, the competitive side, the actual scores should be the mass majority, the dominant portion of how you're evaluated. In the end, it should be about fun as well. If it's not fun, if you're going to a tournament and you're having a miserable time, something is wrong, and the problem could be in the tournament structure. It could be in how the competition is built, but it could also be the problem in who you're playing and the encouragement of how good, how well people are the good sportsmanship that they evoke. But it also could be the problem in you, and that's something that it really is going to require some honesty and some inner reflection, where some self-awareness to see whether or not it is you. If you're going into a tournament and you're not having a good time, it could be for a variety of different reasons, but I think that the main goal for a tournament should be to enjoy yourself, because there's only a few people that are going to win. You can strive to win. Your goal should be, if you're going to compete, to try to be victorious. but there's only going to be a few people that are going to get that top prize or that top tier. So if you walk away thinking that you want to do well, but you want to enjoy yourself and have a good time, then you're never going to lose. And there you have it. So hope you enjoyed this, guys. I know it was a little bit long-winded. Looking forward to putting out more content. Have a great day, everybody.